David had been working at the same law office for almost 3 years. It was the kind of job that paid well but demanded everything from you. Long hours, endless paperwork, and clients who expected miracles. He'd gotten used to the routine, though. Coffee at 7 in the morning, review cases until noon, meetings in the afternoon. And if he was lucky, he'd leave by 7 in the evening. His life had a pattern, a rhythm that felt safe and predictable. Then one Monday morning, the senior partner called everyone into the conference room. They were hiring someone new, a paralegal who'd come with excellent recommendations from another firm across town. Her name was Claire. When she walked into the office that first day, David barely noticed her. She was just another colleague, another person who'd need help finding the copy room and figuring out the office coffee machine. Claire was quiet. She didn't join the others for lunch breaks or participate in the usual office gossip. By the water cooler, she arrived early, left late, and kept her head down. David appreciated that about her. In a place full of big personalities and even bigger egos, her silence felt refreshing. Their conversations, when they happened, were brief and always about work. She'd ask him where to find a specific file. He'd tell her which conference room was free for client calls. Nothing more, nothing less. David was engaged to Lauren. They met in college, dated for 5 years, and gotten engaged last Christmas. Lauren was everything everyone said you should want in a partner. She was kind, supportive, beautiful, and she loved him completely. The wedding was planned for next spring. Lauren had already picked out the venue, chosen the flowers, and spent countless evenings showing him color swatches for napkins that all looked the same to him. He smiled and nodded, trying to match her excitement, but deep down, something felt off. He couldn't name it, couldn't point to anything specific. He just felt like he was going through the motions, checking boxes on a list someone else had written. The months passed, and Claire remained a quiet presence in the office. David found himself working on a case with her in late October. They had to prepare documents for a trial, and the deadline was tight. They spent long days together in the small conference room, surrounded by boxes of files and empty coffee cups. Claire was brilliant at her job. She caught details others missed, organized chaos into order, and never complained about the workload. David started to see her differently, not as just another colleague, but as someone he genuinely respected. One evening in early November, rain hammered against the office windows. Everyone else had gone home hours ago. David was finishing up some notes when he heard footsteps in the hallway. Claire appeared in his doorway, still in her work clothes, her bag over her shoulder. He assumed she was leaving and raised his hand to wave goodbye, but she didn't leave. She just stood there, staring at him with an expression he'd never seen on her face before. "Are you okay?" David asked, setting down his pen. Claire took a step into his office. Then another. She stopped a few feet from his desk, close enough that he could see her hands shaking slightly at her sides. The rain outside seemed to get louder in the silence between them. "I need to tell you something," she said, her voice so quiet he almost didn't hear it over the storm. "And I know I shouldn't. I know it's wrong and complicated and probably the worst timing possible." David felt his heart rate pick up. Something about her tone, about the way she was looking at him, made him nervous. "What is it?" he asked. Claire took a deep breath. "You make me feel something dangerous. Something I have no right to feel. Something I've tried to ignore for months now, but I can't anymore. Every time you walk into a room, every time we work together, every time you smile at something stupid someone says in a meeting, I feel it, and it scares me because I've never felt anything like this before." The words hung in the air between them. David sat frozen in his chair, unable to process what he'd just heard. His mind raced through a dozen responses, but none of them made it to his mouth. He thought about Lauren, about the wedding invitations that had just been sent out last week, about the life he'd planned that suddenly felt like it was built on sand. Claire didn't wait for him to respond. Maybe she knew he wouldn't be able to. She turned quickly and walked out of his office, her footsteps echoing down the empty hallway. A moment later, he heard the elevator doors close. David sat alone in his office for over an hour after that, the rain still pounding against the windows, his work completely forgotten. He kept replaying her words in his mind. The way she'd said dangerous made his chest tight. The way she looked at him made something inside him crack open. Something he'd been keeping carefully locked away. He picked up his phone and saw 3 missed calls from Lauren. She probably made dinner and was wondering where he was. He should call her back. He should go home, kiss her hello, tell her about his day minus this conversation, and pretend nothing had changed. But everything had changed. In the space of 2 minutes, Claire had named something he'd been feeling too, but had refused to acknowledge. That pull, that electricity, that sense that something profound was happening just beneath the surface of their professional interactions. David finally packed up his things and headed to the parking garage. His hand shook as he started his car. He drove home on autopilot, his mind somewhere else entirely. When he walked through the door of the apartment he shared with Lauren, she was waiting on the couch with takeout containers spread across the coffee table. "There you are." "I was getting worried," she said, standing up to hug him. "Long day." "Yeah," David managed. "Really long day." He held her, breathing in the familiar scent of her shampoo, feeling the comfort of her embrace. This was his life. This was what he'd chosen. But as Lauren pulled back and smiled at him, asking about his day, all he could think about was Claire standing in his office doorway, taking that step forward, saying those words that had turned his entire world upside down. That night, David lay awake while Lauren slept peacefully beside him. He stared at the ceiling, knowing that nothing would be the same again. Claire had opened a door he didn't know existed, and now he couldn't close it no matter how hard he tried. The next morning, David woke up exhausted. He barely slept, his mind replaying the scene from last night over and over. Claire's words, the look in her eyes, the way his entire body had reacted to her confession. He got ready for work in a fog, barely tasting his coffee, barely hearing Lauren as she talked about her plans for the day. At the office, David tried to focus on anything but Claire. He buried himself in paperwork, took calls he normally would have delegated, even volunteered to attend the client meeting he had no reason to be in. But it was useless every time someone walked past his office. He looked up, half expecting to see her. When she finally did appear, around 10 in the morning, carrying a stack of files to the conference room, their eyes met for just a second. She looked away quickly, her face flushing, and kept walking. The next few days were torture. David and Claire moved around each other like ghosts, careful never to be alone together, keeping their conversations strictly professional when others were around. But the tension was there, thick and suffocating. Other people in the office started noticing. His colleague Ryan made a joke about the weird energy between them during lunch. His assistant asked if everything was okay with the Henderson case he and Claire were working on. Together, David knew he should do something, report what happened to HR maybe, or request to work with different staff. But he did neither. Instead, he found himself staying late at the office more often, telling Lauren he had extra work to finish. He wasn't sure what he was hoping for. Maybe another conversation with Claire. Maybe a chance to tell her that she was wrong. Then whatever she felt was one-sided, except that would be a lie. The truth was becoming impossible to ignore. David had been attracted to Claire for months, maybe from the very beginning. He'd just been too committed to his plans, too invested in his relationship with Lauren. To admit it, he convinced himself that what he felt was just respect for a colleague, appreciation for someone good at their job. But it was more than that. So much more. One evening, nearly 2 weeks after Claire's confession, David found himself alone in the elevator heading down to the parking garage. The doors were about to close. When a hand shot through, stopping them, Claire stepped in. They were the only 2 people in the small space. The doors closed. Neither of them spoke at first. The elevator descended slowly, the numbers ticking down above the door. David could hear his own heartbeat in his ears. He could smell Claire's perfume, something light and floral that he'd never noticed before, but would probably never forget now. "I'm sorry," Claire said suddenly, still staring straight ahead at the doors. "I shouldn't have said what I said. It was inappropriate and unfair to you. I've been trying to figure out how to take it back, but you can't unsay something like that, can you? David turned to look at her. She was gripping the strap of her bag so tightly her knuckles were white. You can't. He agreed quietly. And honestly, I'm not sure I'd want you to. Claire's eyes snapped to his face. Why with surprise? I can't stop thinking about it, David continued, the words spilling out before he could stop them. About what you said. About how you looked when you said it. I keep telling myself I shouldn't care. That I'm engaged, that I have a whole life planned out with someone else. But I do care. I can't stop caring. The elevator reached the parking level and the doors slid open. Neither of them moved. What are we doing? Claire whispered. I don't know, David admitted. But I think we need to figure it out because this, whatever this is, it's not going away. They finally stepped out of the elevator, but instead of walking to their cars, they stood there in the cold concrete garage, the fluorescent lights humming above them. I was married before, Claire said suddenly. Did you know that? David shook his head. I got married when I was 24 to a guy everyone loved. My parents adored him. My friends thought we were the perfect couple. He was successful, handsome, treated me well. We had this beautiful wedding and bought a nice house in the suburbs. Everything looked right from the outside. What happened? David asked. Nothing happened. That was the problem. We were roommates who happened to be married. There was no passion, no real connection. We could have a pleasant dinner together and go to bed in the same room. But there was nothing deeper. No fire. I stuck it out for 3 years, thinking maybe that's just what marriage was supposed to be. Safe, comfortable, predictable. Claire finally looked directly at him. Then I got divorced and promised myself I'd never settle again. I promised myself that if I ever felt something real, something that made me feel alive, I wouldn't run from it, just because it was complicated or scary. And that's what this is? David asked. That fire you didn't have before. When you walk into a room, my heart speeds up. Claire said simply, when we're working together and your hand accidentally brushes mine reaching for a file, I feel it for hours afterward. When you laugh at something during a meeting, I find myself smiling even if I don't know what was funny. Is that crazy? No, David said, his voice rough, because I feel it too. I've been feeling it for months and pretending I wasn't. They stood there in that parking garage for almost an hour, talking about everything they'd been holding back. David told her about his relationship with Lauren, how it felt like checking boxes on someone else's list, how the wedding planning made him feel like he was watching his own life from outside his body, how sometimes he looked at Lauren and felt affection but not that deeper thing that fire Claire had talked about. Claire told him about the walls she'd built after her divorce, how she'd sworn off relationships entirely until she figured out who she was on her own, how meeting David had knocked down all those walls without her permission. When they finally said goodbye and went to their separate cars, nothing was resolved. But something had shifted. They'd named it, acknowledged it, put it out in the open where they couldn't pretend it didn't exist anymore. David drove home that night, knowing he was standing at a crossroads. He could choose the safe path, the one he'd been on, marry Lauren, and spend the rest of his life wondering what if. Or he could choose the dangerous path, the one that led toward Claire, toward that fire he'd never felt before, with no guarantee of where it would go. That night, Lauren was already asleep when he got home. David sat on the edge of their bed, watching her breathe peacefully, and felt something crack open in his chest. She deserved someone who looked at her the way he looked at Claire. She deserved that fire, and he couldn't give it to her no matter how hard he tried. David decided he had to be honest, not just with himself, but with Lauren too. She deserved at least that much. The thought of hurting her made him sick to his stomach. But leading her on, marrying her while his heart was somewhere else, would be so much worse. He waited until the weekend. Saturday morning, Lauren was making pancakes in the kitchen, humming along to music playing from her phone. She looked happy, content. The sight of it made what David had to do even harder. Can we talk? He asked, sitting down at the kitchen table. Something in his tone made Lauren turn off the stove. She set down the spatula and came to sit across from him, concern already showing on her face. What's wrong? David took a deep breath. I need to tell you something, and it's going to hurt. But I can't keep pretending everything is fine when it's not." Lauren's face went pale. "Are you sick? Did something happen?" "No, nothing like that." David forced himself to meet her eyes. "There's someone at work, a woman named Claire. She told me a couple weeks ago that she has feelings for me, real feelings, and I realized that I have feelings for her too." The silence that followed felt like it lasted forever. Lauren just stared at him, her expression shifting from confusion to shock to something that looked like understanding. "Did you?" she started, then stopped. "Did anything happen between you two?" "No," David said quickly. "Nothing physical. We've barely even talked outside of work. But the feelings are there, and I can't ignore them anymore. And honestly, Lauren, I think I need to tell you something else. Something I've been afraid to admit even to myself." Lauren's eyes filled with tears, but she didn't look away. "I don't think I've been all in for a while now," David continued, his voice cracking. "Not the way you deserve. You're amazing. You're kind and beautiful, and anyone would be lucky to have you. But I've been going through the motions, pretending I was excited about the wedding when really I felt like I was slowly drowning. That's not your fault. That's on me. But you deserve someone who feels about you the way you feel about them. Someone who can't wait to marry you. Not someone who's just doing what he thinks he's supposed to do." A tear rolled down Lauren's cheek. She wiped it away quickly, but more followed. "I knew," she whispered. "I think I've known for months." David felt his chest tighten. "What? You've been distant, distracted. I talked to you and could see you weren't really listening. When I get excited about wedding stuff, you'd smile, but your eyes looked empty. I told myself I was imagining it, that you were just stressed with work. But deep down, I knew something had changed. I'm so sorry," David said, his own eyes burning. "You deserve so much better than this." Lauren was quiet for a long moment, more tears falling silently. When she finally spoke, her voice was steady despite everything. "You're right, I do deserve better. I deserve someone who looks at me the way I've seen you zone out during dinner. And I know now you were probably thinking about her. I deserve someone who can't wait to start our life together, not someone who sees our wedding as an obligation." She stood up and walked to the window, arms wrapped around herself. "I think we need to call off the wedding," she said, not turning around. "Actually, not think. I know we need to call off the wedding. And honestly, David, I think we need to end this completely. Because even if nothing happens with this Claire person, you've shown me that I'm not the one for you. And I'm not going to beg someone to love me the way I love them." David felt tears on his own face now. "I never wanted to hurt you." "I know," Lauren said, finally turning to look at him. "But you did, and we can't come back from this. You need to figure out what you really want, and I need to figure out how to move forward without you. Can you stay somewhere else for a while?" "I need space to process this." David nodded. He packed a bag that afternoon and got a room at a hotel downtown. For the next week, he barely ate, barely slept. He'd blown up his entire life. He'd hurt someone he cared about deeply. And for what? For feelings? For some connection with a woman he barely knew outside of work. At the office, he finally told Claire what had happened. They met at a coffee shop far from where anyone from work would see them. "You ended your engagement?" Claire asked, her face going white. "Because of what I said. Not just because of what you said." David corrected. "Because of what I felt. What I've been feeling. Claire, I was about to marry someone I didn't love. Not really. Not the way you're supposed to love someone you're going to spend your life with. You helped me see that. But what if this is all in our heads?" Claire asked, her voice shaking. "What if whatever this is between us isn't real? What if it's just attraction or chemistry or something that fades? You ended a whole relationship over something we don't even know will work." David reached across the table and took her hand. It was the first time they'd really touched, and the contact sent electricity through his whole body. "That's the scary part," he admitted. "I don't know if this will work. I don't know where this goes. But I do know that what I felt with Lauren wasn't enough. And what I feel when I'm around you is more real than anything I've felt in years. Maybe that makes me stupid or reckless, but I'd rather take a risk on something real than play it safe." with something that isn't. Claire looked at their hands, then back at his face. So what happens now? Now we give ourselves space, David said. I need time to heal from ending my relationship. You need time to be sure this is what you want. We both need to figure out if this thing between us can survive outside of stolen conversations and parking garage. Confessions. You're saying we shouldn't see each other? Claire asked. I'm saying we should be smart about this. No more late nights at the office alone. No more private conversations. We keep things professional for a while. If what we feel is real, it'll still be there in a few months. And if it's not, then we'll know before anyone else gets hurt. Claire nodded slowly, though he could see the disappointment in her eyes. You're right. That's the mature thing to do. They left the coffee shop separately. David went back to his hotel room and lay on the bed, staring at the ceiling. He'd done the right thing, ending things with Lauren. But doing the right thing didn't make it hurt less. Over the next few weeks, he helped Lauren pack up his things from their apartment. She was civil but distant, which somehow hurt more than if she'd yelled or cried. They canceled the wedding together, calling vendors, returning deposits, sending messages to guests. Each conversation felt like another small death. Meanwhile, David kept his distance from Claire at work. They still worked together on cases when necessary, but gone were the easy conversations and long looks. They were polite, professional, careful, but the feelings didn't fade. If anything, staying away from her made David want her more. He'd catch glimpses of her in the hallway and feel his heart race. He'd hear her laugh in a meeting and have to remind himself to focus. 2 months after ending his engagement, David finally moved into his own apartment. It was smaller than what he'd shared with Lauren, but it was his. He spent his first night there sitting on the floor surrounded by boxes, wondering if he'd made a terrible mistake. He'd hurt someone he cared about. He'd walked away from a stable future. And for what? For feelings that might lead nowhere. But then he thought about that moment in the parking garage, about the fire Claire had talked about the way his entire body came alive when she was near. He thought about spending the rest of his life never knowing what could have been, and he knew. Despite everything, he made the right choice. The next few months were the hardest of David's life. He threw himself into work, taking on more cases than he should have, staying at the office until exhaustion forced him home. It was easier than sitting alone in his new apartment, thinking about all the ways his life had changed. Lauren had been right to end things completely. David knew that. But knowing something intellectually and feeling it emotionally were two different things. He missed the routine of their life together, the shared dinners, the familiar comfort of someone who knew all his habits. He missed having someone to call when something funny happened, or someone to watch movies with on lazy Sunday afternoons. At work, maintaining distance from Claire was getting harder. They still worked together when necessary, but every interaction felt charged with everything they weren't saying. Sometimes David would look up from his desk and catch her watching him from across the office. Other times, he'd find himself doing the same thing, memorizing the way she moved, the sound of her voice when she was on the phone with clients. Other people in the office definitely noticed. His colleague Ryan cornered him one day in the break room. So are you going to tell me what's going on with you and Claire, or do I have to guess? Ryan asked, pouring himself coffee. Nothing's going on, David said, too quickly, right? That's why there's enough tension between you two to power the whole building. Come on, man. I heard you called off your wedding. Is it because of her? David sighed. There was no point lying. It's complicated. It always is, Ryan said, not unkindly. But life's too short to play it safe all the time. Whatever you're doing, dancing around each other and pretending nothing's there, it's not working. Everyone can see it. The conversation stuck with David. Was he being smart by keeping his distance? Or was he just being afraid? He'd already blown up his life. He'd already taken the biggest risk by ending his engagement. What was he waiting for? Then something happened that forced the decision. Clara came into his office one afternoon in early spring, closing the door behind her. He could tell immediately that something was different. I need to tell you something, she said, staying by the door this time instead of coming closer. I requested a transfer to our branch office across town. It got approved. My last day here is in 2 weeks. David felt like someone had punched him in the gut. What? Why? Because this isn't working, Claire said simply. This thing where we pretend we don't feel what we feel, where we avoid each other and act like colleagues who barely know each other when really. You're the first person I look for when I walk in every morning. It's driving me crazy, David, and I can't keep doing it. So you're just leaving? What else am I supposed to do? Claire's voice rose slightly, emotion breaking through her usual composure. You said we needed space. You said we needed time. Well, it's been months, and nothing has changed except now it hurts more. At least if I'm in a different office. I won't have to see you every day and remember what we're both too scared to try. I'm not scared, David said, standing up from his desk. I'm trying to do the right thing. I just ended a whole engagement. I hurt someone I cared about. I didn't want to jump into something new before I dealt with all that. And have you? Claire asked. Dealt with it? David ran his hand through his hair, frustrated. I don't know. Maybe. How are you supposed to know when you're ready? There's no manual for this. You're right, there isn't. But I know I can't keep working 50 feet away from you, wondering what if. So I'm making the choice for both of us. I'm leaving. Maybe that'll give us both the space we actually need. She turned to go, her hand on the doorknob. Wait, David said. Claire stopped but didn't turn around. Don't go, David said quietly. Or if you do, let me come with you. Not to the branch office, but let me take you to dinner. Let's stop pretending we can ignore this. Because Ryan's right. Everyone can see it anyway. And you're right that it's not working. This distance thing, it's not making the feelings go away. It's just making us both miserable. Claire finally turned around, tears in her eyes. Are you sure? Because I can't do halfway, David. I can't be your maybe or your someday. I've done that before, and it nearly broke me. I'm sure, David said, and realized it was true. He'd spent months trying to be careful, trying to do everything right, trying to make up for the hurt he'd caused Lauren by being extra cautious. But Claire was right. Life didn't work like that. You couldn't heal from one thing by refusing to start another. Sometimes you just had to take the leap. I'm sure, he repeated. I don't know where this goes. I don't know if what we feel will last or if it's just been built up in our heads all this time. But I do know I want to find out, and I know I don't want you to leave. Claire crossed the office and stopped in front of his desk. One dinner. We'll see how it goes. And if it's awkward or weird, or if we realize we've been building this up into something it's not, then I still take the transfer. Deal? Deal, David agreed. They went to dinner that Friday at a small restaurant in a neighborhood where they were unlikely to run into anyone from work. The first few minutes were awkward. They'd spent so much time being careful around each other that actually sitting across the table, just the two of them, felt strange. But then they started talking. Really talking. Not about work or cases or office politics, but about real things. Claire told him about growing up in a small town, about her complicated relationship with her parents, about why she'd become a paralegal instead of a lawyer even though she'd gotten into law school. David told her about his own family, about the pressure he'd always felt to have his life figured out by 30, about how ending his engagement had felt like both a failure and a relief. Hours passed. The restaurant filled up around them, then emptied again. They ordered dessert they didn't eat and coffee that went cold while they talked. And David realized something. This wasn't built up in their heads. This was real. The connection, the chemistry, the feeling that he could talk to her forever and never run out of things to say. When they finally left the restaurant, it was past midnight. They stood on the sidewalk, neither wanting the night to end. So, Claire said, still awkward? Not even a little bit, David admitted. Good, because I'd really like to do this again. If you want to, I want to, David said. But there's something I need to do first, over the next week. David had some difficult conversations. He called Lauren, not to get closure or to explain himself more, but to genuinely apologize. Not for ending things, but for not ending them sooner. For wasting her time when he should have been honest about his doubts from the start. Lauren was gracious in a way he didn't deserve. "I'm seeing someone," she told him. "It's new. But David, I feel things with him that I realize now I never felt with you. So maybe this was what needed to happen for both of us." Hearing that lifted a weight off David's shoulders he hadn't known he was carrying. Lauren was going to be okay. Better than okay. He also talked to HR at work, wanting to make sure there were no policy issues with him and Claire dating. The firm didn't have rules against co-workers dating, as long as there was no direct supervision involved. They just had to disclose the relationship. Claire canceled her transfer request, and slowly, carefully, they started building something real. They went on more dates. They talked for hours on the phone even after spending all day in the same office. They took weekend trips to the coast. And that fire Claire had talked about, the dangerous feeling that had started all of this, it didn't fade. It grew. 6 months passed. David and Claire's relationship stopped being new and started being real. They'd survived the initial rush of feelings and settled into something deeper. They learned each other's quirks and habits. David discovered that Claire was terrible at mornings but came alive at night. Claire learned that David needed complete silence when he was working on complex cases, but loved background noise the rest of the time. They had their first real fight 3 months in, over something stupid about whose turn it was to pick the restaurant. They both said things they regretted, and David spent a terrible night thinking maybe they made a mistake. Maybe this thing between them was just attraction after all. But the next morning, Claire showed up at his apartment with coffee and apologies, and they talked through it like adults. They figured it out, and somehow that fight made David more sure, not less, that what they had was worth protecting. Work became easier too. Once they disclosed their relationship and stopped hiding, the tension disappeared. They could be professional during the day and themselves after hours. Their colleagues adjusted. Even Ryan, who called it from the beginning, eventually stopped making jokes about it. But David still felt like something was unfinished. Not between him and Claire, but between him and himself. He'd taken a huge risk, ended his engagement, chosen an uncertain future over a planned one. And while it had worked out, he couldn't shake the feeling that he'd been running on instinct and luck. What if the next big decision in his life required the same kind of leap? Would he be brave enough to take it again? One Saturday morning, David woke up in Claire's apartment. She was still asleep beside him, her hair spread across the pillow. Sunlight filtered through the curtains. He looked at her and felt that familiar pull in his chest. That dangerous feeling that had started this whole thing. Except it didn't feel dangerous anymore. It felt like home. He got up quietly and made coffee, thinking. His phone buzzed with a text from his mom, asking when she'd get to meet Claire. His sister had been asking the same thing. Everyone in his life wanted to know about this woman who'd changed everything. Claire shuffled into the kitchen a while later, still half asleep, wearing one of his old shirts. "You're thinking too loud," she mumbled. Reaching for the coffee he made, "Sorry," David said, smiling. "Just thinking about everything. How different my life is now compared to a year ago. Good different or scary different?" Claire asked, more awake now. "Both," David admitted. "A year ago, I thought I had everything figured out. I was getting married, had a stable job, a clear path forward. Now I don't know what's coming next, and somehow that feels better. Does that make sense?" Claire came around the counter and wrapped her arms around him. "It makes perfect sense. The life you had before was safe, but it wasn't yours." "Not really. You were living someone else's version of what your life should look like. And now you're figuring out what you actually want. That's scarier, but it's real." They spent the day together, doing nothing special. Farmers market in the morning, lunch at their favorite spot, a walk through the park. Simple things. But David found himself noticing details. The way Claire laughed at a dog chasing pigeons. How she knew his coffee order without asking. The comfortable silence between them that didn't need to be filled. Around 3 in the afternoon, they ended up at the farmer's market where everything had started. Not the office where Claire had first confessed her feelings, but this market where they'd had their first non-work conversation that Friday, after their first dinner. David hadn't been here since. They walked through the stalls, Claire picking out flowers, chatting with vendors. David found himself thinking about that conversation with Lauren, about deserving someone who looked at you a certain way. He thought about Claire standing in his office doorway all those months ago, scared but brave enough to say something anyway. He thought about all the moments that had led them here. Claire stopped at a flower stall, her arms full of sunflowers and roses. The vendor said something that made her laugh, and in that moment, David knew, not in a dramatic, lightning strike way, but in a quiet, certain way. He wanted this life. He wanted her. Not someday, not eventually, but now. Hey, he said, walking up beside her. Claire turned, smiling. What do you think? Too many flowers? There's no such thing as too many flowers, David said. But I need to tell you something. Something in his tone made Claire's smile shift, became more serious. Okay, when you came to my office that night and told me I made you feel something dangerous. You scared me, not because of what you said, but because part of me already knew I felt the same way. And that terrified me because it meant everything in my life was wrong, David. We've talked about this, Claire started, but he shook his head. Let me finish. You were right about the dangerous feelings being the ones worth following. And I'm glad I followed this one, even though it meant hurting people and blowing up my whole life. But here's what I've realized. It's not dangerous anymore. What I feel for you, it's not some scary unknown thing. It's the most certain thing in my life. Claire's eyes went wide, the flowers forgotten in her arms. I'm not proposing, David said quickly, seeing her expression. We've only been together 6 months, and after what happened with Lauren, I'm not going to rush into anything. But I want you to know that this isn't temporary for me. You're not my rebound or my quarter-life crisis or my midlife crisis coming early. You're the person I want to build a life with. And I needed you to know that. Flowers tumbled from Claire's arms as she dropped them, reaching for him instead. You can't just say something like that in the middle of a farmer's market, she said, her voice thick with emotion. Why not? Because now I'm going to cry and everyone's going to think you actually did propose. David laughed and pulled her closer. Would that be so bad? Someday, Claire said, when we're both ready. Someday I want you to ask me that question for real. But you're right. We need to build our life first. Figure out who we are together before we make it official. Deal, David said, kissing her forehead. They picked up the fallen flowers together, the vendor giving them a knowing smile. As they walked through the market, hands linked, David felt something settle in his chest. Peace, maybe, or just the certainty that he was finally on the right path. His phone buzzed. A text from Lauren. He almost didn't open it, but curiosity won out. Hey, I heard from Ryan that you and Claire are still together. I'm glad. I really am. You deserve to be happy, and it sounds like you are. Take care of yourself. David showed the text to Claire. That's good of her, Claire said softly. Takes a strong person to wish an ex well. She's better off without me, David said. I hope she finds someone who gives her that fire we talked about. She will. Claire said confidently. Some people are meant to teach us what we don't want, so we recognize what we do want when it shows up. They spent the rest of the afternoon at the market, then went back to Claire's place and arranged all the flowers in every container they could find. That night, surrounded by sunflowers and roses, eating takeout on the couch, David looked at Claire and thought about how close he'd come to missing this. If Claire hadn't been brave enough to speak up, if he hadn't been brave enough to listen, if they both played it safe instead of taking the risk. Thank you, he said suddenly. For what? Claire asked, looking up from her food. For taking a step forward that night. For saying something dangerous. For not letting me play it safe. Claire set down her food and moved closer to him. Thank you for being brave enough to let go of the life you thought you wanted, so you could find the life you actually needed. Still dangerous? David asked, echoing that first conversation. Terrifying, Claire admitted with a smile, but in the best possible way. They sat there as the sun went down, the apartment full of flowers. Both of them finally brave enough to stop running from what they'd felt from the start. The dangerous feeling that had brought them together had transformed into something else. Something deeper. Something worth every risk they'd taken to get here. And David knew, with absolute certainty, that this was just the beginning.